Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our number 3 community of practice of Multinet. Multinet is a multicultural disability and a diverse and training project that we are focused on two mainly things, as the name says. We are focused on training. We are developing products, and we are also developing different materials related with the intersectionality between disability and diversity. So as part of the products and materials that we are developing includes storytellings, it includes infographics, information that we share through the social media, and also the community of practice. So those activities that we are developing are related to the training of disabilities and diversity. And the other part of the project that we are focusing is in developing a network. And this activity that it is the community of practice is directly related to developing this network in this intersectionality. So Multinet is very interested on approaching different aspects of this intersectionality, that it is very complex, and having your presence here is very important because it is new, it is critical, and we have a lot to cover. So for this community of practice, we are lucky to have Victoria Ayala, who will draw upon her experience at CAPSA. CAPSA is Citizen Against Physical and Sexual Abuse organization here in Logan, and she will provide valuable insights into the intersectionality of domestic violence, disability, and cultural diversity. Victoria is a case worker, as I said, in CAPSA, graduated from Weber State University with a bachelor in child and family studies. She has a passion about giving back to the community related to the topic of domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. So saying that, we are lucky to have you, Victoria, and the show is yours. Thank you, everybody, in advance to be part of this presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, just like you said, I'm Victoria. I'm a caseworker here at CAPSA. I'm really happy to be here and share insights into the intersection of domestic violence, disability, and cultural diversity. I feel like as a caseworker, I've gained valuable knowledge about intersectional advocacy. I think it's crucial for us as professionals or any upcoming professionals to continually update our understanding to best serve our communities, especially those that are marginalized. So to start off, I first want to start with an acknowledgement of country. We honor and respect the Indigenous peoples as the custodians of the land on which we gather today. We pay respect to elders past and present. So let's go over first what we'll be learning today. Feel free to ask any questions at the end of the presentation. Your input is highly encouraged. My goal for everyone after this presentation is just to have more knowledge about intersectionality in regards to domestic violence and sexual assault, how to best help survivors, and as well as take a look at current practices and maybe make some changes if you haven't already to make it more inclusive and to also improve your advocacy. I feel like you can always improve. There's always more information coming out, and the training is never done. You can always improve on whatever you need. So the first objective is to examine the statistical data on domestic violence and sexual assault, both on a national level and within the state of Utah. Well, we're also going to explore the factors contributing to the heightened vulnerability of individuals with disabilities, and we're also going to look at the impact of cultural factors for those to access support and resources, especially for those with disabilities. So first things first, let's first examine national statistics. We recognize here at CAPSA that abuse can happen to anyone regardless of gender, but I think it is important to address that it is happening disproportionately to women, and especially women with disabilities. So nationally, 23.8% of women and 20.1% of men in the US have a disability. When women with disabilities experience intimate partner violence at twice the rate of other populations. That includes intimate partner sexual violence, stalking, psychological aggression, as opposed to their non-disabled peers, as well as men with disabilities are more likely to experience intimate partner stalking, psychological aggression, as opposed to their non-disabled peers. I think it's important to recognize that there are different categories of abuse. While yes, physical abuse can be more noticeable, especially if clients come in with injuries, bruises, black eyes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other types of abuse aren't as valid or as horrible. And especially for those with disabilities, a study conducted by the Spectrum Institute Disability and Abuse Project, they found that individuals with disabilities experience some form of abuse, either from a family member, an intimate partner, caregiver, or even an acquaintance. 87.2% experience verbal, emotional abuse, 50.6% experience physical abuse, and 41.6% experience sexual abuse, 37.4% experience neglect, and 31.5% experience financial abuse. Unfortunately, we do have clients that do come in and say, well, he never hit me, there's never been any physical abuse. But like I said, we try to talk to them, do a safety assessment with them, and ask them what has happened throughout their whole relationship, help them identify the different categories of abuse. And again, it's not noted here, but I do want to add that 37.3% only reported this to law enforcement. Okay, so now let's focus in on Utah statistics. This data is from 2021, so fairly recently. It was also obtained from the CDC. Currently, we have 573,350 adults in Utah who have a disability. That's equal to 1 in 4 adults in Utah. And the types of disabilities that we're seeing is mobility, cognition, independent living, hearing, vision, and self-care. I also wanted to emphasize, it doesn't show here, but data also showed that adults with disabilities in Utah also experienced health disparities. That means they're more likely to suffer from depression, obesity, they're more likely to smoke, have diabetes, and heart disease. So now that we're informed about the amount of individuals with disabilities nationally and in our state, let's talk about the factors contributing to vulnerability and why it can make it hard for survivors to flee from abuse. So to do that, I'm going to be using the power and control wheel diagrams. For those of you that aren't familiar with these wheels diagrams show us of tactics abusive partners use to keep survivors in relationships. The inside of the wheel are behaviors, subtle behaviors. They represent continual behaviors over time, while the outer ring represents physical and sexual violence. For those who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, the outer ring represents homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. I think it's important that I show you all wheels side by side because this one right here is regarding those with a disability. And then this one right here is specifically for immigrants, individuals. And then again, this one is regarding those that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. I wanted to show you how intersectionality is important to remember, especially when working with survivors, because while you're addressing, let's say, this part of their identity, their disability, you also need to address the other parts of their identity. You can't just ignore these other parts that may contribute to their vulnerability. To ignore these other parts, I feel is not trauma-informed, it's not inclusive or insensitive, and in my opinion, can do more harm. So let's just go through each wheel. The first one is, like I said, for those with disabilities. So a big one is isolation, especially for those that are not able-bodied, they're not able to leave the house without assistance. Abusers can either lock them in the house, in the room, leave them at the top of the stairs if they're not able to go down the stairs, minimizing, denying, and blaming. And then bullying, that can be making jokes about their disability. A big one that we see is economic abuse, especially if their abuser is in charge of, let's say, their Social Security disability income, and then controlling behaviors that can be taken away, their walker, their wheelchair, hearing aids, stuff like that. And then force and threats. And then another big one we see is using children. So saying, oh, I'm going to take away the children, they're never going to see you again because you're disabled and you're not able to take care of them. That is the big one that we see. And then moving on to those who are immigrants or refugees, a big one that we see, economic abuse, is not letting them work, not letting them obtain any job training or schooling, threatening to report them if they work under the table, sexual abuse, calling them a prostitute or mail order bride, alleging that they have a history of prostitution on legal papers, using children, again, a big one, threatening to take the children away from them, or threatening to report her to immigration, to have the children taken away, threats, threatening to withdraw the petition to legalize their status. That ties into this one right here, which is a really big one that I see a lot with my clients. I see a lot of, especially women that come to the US and they marry an American citizen or resident with the promise that, you know, they're going to take care of them, they're going to have, you know, this happy marriage, and then they start using that as a way to control them and to intimidate them. So that's one that we see. Intimidation, like I said, you know, either hiding or destroying important papers. That can be their passports, ID cards, healthcare cards, or even destroying the only property they have from their country of origin. And then isolation, this is another big one that I see, isolating from their friends or family or from community members that speak their native language, and then not allowing them to learn any English. So imagine being a person who is both has a disability and then also is an immigrant, and then let's say they are also part of the LGBTQ plus community. We can see how much that can compound and how difficult that's going to be for them to leave the relationship or to even obtain any help, because they're gonna have all these barriers, you know, working against them. So then some barriers on the institutional level, I think it's important for me to add. Number one is untrained staff. So just staff that that don't know of their culture, that don't learn about it, stuff like that is a big one that's gonna drive people away from coming to your institution to receive help. And then another big one is unknown or limited resources. So not even knowing of what resources you can give them. I think this one is one that I am very careful about, especially working with undocumented survivors. I'm very careful on what resources I give them, because I'm not going to tell them to go to this, let's say this agency, and then they go and then they don't qualify because they're undocumented. That's re-traumatizing for them, because they're not going to be able to obtain the help. And I if I can avoid that, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make sure, I'm going to call the agency, or I'm going to work with them to make sure that they're going to be able to help this individual. And then the third one is inaccessibility. So even something as simple as not having like a ramp, an elevator for those that can't use stairs. Resources, it can be as simple as having pamphlets too high up, so people that have limited mobility can't reach these pamphlets, or even having resources not available to those who are blind or deaf. So let's also add on the layer of cultural factors. So all of those barriers, and then imagine having these other cultural factors that can also have survivors not being able to obtain the help that they need. So I first want to add that Utah is increasing in diversity. This data indicates the statistics for ethnicity and race in Utah. And as we can see, communities of colors are being impacted by domestic violence and sexual violence at a greater rate than their Caucasian counterparts. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to add. So I had this picture of an onion. When I think about intersectionality, I think of an onion because onions have layers, and I feel like with intersectionality, there's also layers, and there's all these factors that play into how survivors obtain the help that they need. So let's move on to some cultural factors. So the first one is, of course, limited language proficiency. So not understanding, not knowing English, maybe, again, their abuser is not allowing them to learn English. That's a big one. They're not going to be able to go to the agency, especially if the agency doesn't have interpreting services for them. They're not going to be able to have an advocate. They're not going to be able to have someone that helps them. Disparities in economic and social resources. Again, I want to add that we know that domestic violence and sexual abuse can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what social class, but it is important to note that these marginalized communities do have some disparities. An example I can give, is a survivor who is undocumented and relies on their abuser for economic stability for themselves or for their children, it's going to be hard for them to leave that relationship because they solely depend on this person. And then add on to the layer that they're undocumented, they're not going to qualify for state or government benefits. So that's a big one. And then of course, immigration status, and then unfamiliarity with systems and legal rights. So something as simple as not even knowing what the US laws are of domestic violence, how to make a police report. A lot of the times I have clients that aren't even aware about protective orders. So that's just a big one, just not being familiar with the system. And that plays a big role for immigrant individuals. And then another big one, identifying abuse might be challenging due to cultural background. An example I give is machismo from Latin American countries, where the man is the breadwinner. He's the one that takes care of the family. I want to add that we don't necessarily want to force our views. If that's something that they identify with, we don't necessarily want to tell them, no, that's wrong. That's not trauma informed. We just want to give them the tools that they need. I think that it becomes a problem when the abuser uses this cultural norm to control and abuse their partner. That's when it becomes a problem, and we want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to leave this abusive relationship. And then the last one, of course, is lack of cultural competence by service providers. So language services, or even just advocates not even knowing why these individuals came to the United States. And I wanted to emphasize that it's important that the advocate, without building any report, ask the survivor directly. I think that that's not trauma informed. And I think that if the survivor is already going through so much, they're going through domestic violence or sexual abuse, the last thing that they need is to have to explain to you why they came to this country. I think that is the responsibility of the advocate or the service provider to educate yourself. So that's just something that I wanted to emphasize. So, sorry, I'm probably going too fast, but tying it all together, every time I do a training, I always ask myself, okay, what do I do with this information? How can I make this applicable? And I wanted to answer that question with an analogy of this bird cage, which was introduced by Marilyn Fry in her essay, Oppression. So I want you guys to look at this cage, and I want you to picture the wires as they represent the various systems of oppression, and then the person inside the cage, or the bird, represents the person. So by removing only one wire of the cage, the person in the cage is still not able to fully leave the cage or fully leave the relationship. So I'm going to give an example. So I have a client who is from Afghanistan. So she is disabled. She doesn't speak any English. She suffered extensive physical abuse, both in Afghanistan and in the US. She's illiterate. So anytime she gets like any documents or any mails, like she doesn't understand it, and you can't translate it because she doesn't know it in her own language either. So some actions that we have taken is, first, of course, make sure she's physically safe. Again, helped her understand her rights in the US, helped her obtain the tools that she needs to be informed about domestic violence. Again, we don't want to force any of our views onto her. We want to help her just have the tools that she needs. And then we've, of course, built rapport with her. And another thing that I have done is helped sit down with her, read the mail to her, read any important documents to her in a way that she can understand. And then doing warm handoffs to other agencies. So like going physically with her, because I don't just want to tell her, okay, just go to this agency and they'll help you out. And then they don't have interpreting services. I'm going to physically go with her and make sure that they're going to be able to help her. And by doing that, I'm taking a step back and I'm analyzing the barriers that she's facing to fully help her obtain the help that she needs. So going back to this bird cage analogy. So let's say my client is the bird in the cage. If I were to just tell her, if I were only to help her get help for her disability, so just removing one wire from the cage, is she going to be able to fully leave the relationship? no, like she's not going to be able to fully leave and get the help that she needs. And maybe it's going to even turn her away from using our services, because she's going to say, well, like this person is just telling me to go here and here, but I don't even know what that agency is. It needs to explain to me. So I just think that that's really important. And to close off, yes, our appointments always like take longer, and they still do, but honestly, I think that she deserves advocacy just as much as anyone else, if not more, due to the barriers that she's facing. And if I didn't do all these things with her, she may not have been able to fully leave or escape their relationship. So to close off, us as professionals, we should go beyond the micro level and work to challenge our social structures and policies that marginalize populations based on their intersectional identities. So yeah, thank you. So I just want to open the room up to anyone that has any questions. I'll do my best to answer. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat that I can answer.
Hi, Victoria. Sorry, Randy, did you have a question?
I was just going to say that I really appreciate your presentation, Victoria. It was so sensitive and so helpful. And I don't have a question. I just want to say, wow, kudos to you for especially the stuff you talked about at the very end, the recognizing, especially with New American Communities, but anybody obviously that is in a situation that has having an intersectionality. One of the things that you talked about alone would be quite a lot for a person to navigate. Having a case manager, a caseworker, an ally like yourself to recognize that when they leave CAPSA's doors or CRIC's doors or anyone's doors, going to the next service provider, really having an advocate like yourself, and that's extra work for you. So I really appreciate and want to let you know how much I admire you for doing that. That
means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Hey, Victoria, looks like we have a question in the chat from Aaron. And the question is, what are some basic recommendations to anybody who comes across an individual who needs support after being in an abusive relationship? And Aaron says they love the analogy of the birdcage.
Thank you. I'm sorry, could you read the question to me again?
Of course. What are some basic recommendations to anybody who comes across an individual who needs support after being in an abusive relationship?
I think some basics can be, just again, first making sure that you're connecting if they speak a different language, making sure that you either have an advocate that speaks their language or have interpreting services. So that's a big one. I think making sure you're connecting them to the right language, not just assuming the language that they're speaking. And then also just being sensitive and, not prying, because I think that that's a big one, that I have people come to me and ask, well, how can I help? How can I support so-and-so? How can I support my friend that's going through domestic violence or sexual assault? I think the biggest thing that I can say is to be patient and have them, open up to you instead of prying. I think that's a big tool that I've used. And so just being, patient with them and sensitive, and not, forcing them to tell you what they need. So just being a listening ear. I think that's what I would do.
That's some great advice. Victoria, I actually had a question for you back when you were talking about the barriers section. And I was just curious, especially with those like institutional barriers, if you could kind of share any strategies CAPSA uses to kind of try to get past those barriers.
Are you talking about these barriers?
Yeah.
Institutional barriers?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm turning back to them. Oh, right here. I can't speak for CAPSA as an organization, but I think that some of the things that I've seen is just continuously holding staff and caseworkers advocates to continue trainings. I think that we have a requirement of every year to have a certain amount of hours, training hours. So I think that's good that CAPSA does that to make sure that we're always staying up to date on our training. But yeah, I think that's something that I've seen that CAPSA does that I think is really important. It's good.
Hi, Victoria. This is Eduardo. First of all, thank you very much for this
Thank you
for this great presentation. It's helping us to understand and learn about this intersectionality. I really like the statistics, some of the numbers that you put it there at the beginning, because it is showing us that there are huge problems. Based on numbers, based on data that need to be approached and somehow need to be faced. So my question for you would be as well that when we are talking about diversity, we are talking about a huge number of factors that includes race, ethnicity, you put it immigration status, it can be also geographic location is different. People who lives in rural places compared with people who lives in more urban places, age, socioeconomic status, among others. Based on your experience and based on your knowledge, do you think that these intersectionalities sometimes are affecting different layers of this population? And what are some of the differences that you have noticed or you can help us to understand better among this diverse group?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Could you rephrase it?
Yeah. Do you have any advice for the diversity of factors that sometimes impact those issues, considering different factors?
Well, I think something just as simple as just being informed, so doing what you're doing right now is getting trained on just the different intersections, so just staying up to date on trainings, and then on an institutional level just recognizing that there are all these factors. And I mean, I think that's a big thing for institutions to just be at least informed about this, recognizing that there are all these barriers that some survivors may face that honestly they might need more help than others. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Victoria, we have another question in the chat. I'm just gonna read it out so that in the recording people can understand what the question is. But this question is from JJ, who asks, can you share any advice about how to initiate conversations about domestic violence with cultural sensitivity? For example, the classic, do you feel safe at home? And other guiding questions may mean something different to someone who has a different cultural background.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's a really great starting point of what you said, like, do you feel safe at home? Just letting them know that, hey, I'm a safe, and maybe you don't want to talk about it right now, but I just want to let you know that I'm a safe person to talk to if you ever just want to have a listening ear. I think that would be a good starting phrase to just kind of letting them know, like, I'm here for you whenever you're ready to talk about it, because I feel like, again, just patience and just just letting them know whenever you're ready to talk about it. I'll be here for you, and we can discuss it more, and I can find ways on how I can help you, or I can connect you with someone that can help you. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Does anybody else have any questions for Victoria? Feel free to pop in or put it in chat. I'm not seeing anything new. Victoria, do you have any?
Yeah.
I
Oh, is there one?
should have waited a second longer. Okay, here is kind of another question from Andy. Andy says, my question for Victoria is not really abusive, but it's about something else. I'm a volunteer at an elementary school, and we have a student who moved from Mexico. They had to leave all their son's medical equipment in Mexico, and I'm trying to see where I can help the family. Victoria, do you have any thoughts on, it sounds like maybe they're asked. Oh, Andy, sorry, Andy. I just realized it was a direct message to me. I apologize if you didn't want that read out loud.
Oh.
But Victoria, do you have any resources that people could
Yeah.
use when trying to help, especially it sounds like recent immigrants?
Yeah, I would maybe look into options with independence, and then I believe the caseworker who speaks Spanish there is called Diana. So maybe you could refer the family there, and then they're maybe to see if they are able to help out. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Options for Independence is a great
For
resource.
Yes.
That's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, Victoria, unless anyone else has other questions, do you have any final words for us?
I just want to express that I'm grateful for everyone that's joined and that's actually taken the time to educate themselves. I think it's really touching to see people you know, make an effort to educate themselves, and especially for those that are wanting to get into this field. It just shows that you are doing all you can to make sure that you're being inclusive to survivors or anyone that needs help. So just grateful for seeing everyone that's joined. So yeah.